goes back, the prophetic words that tie to it, and to show what's coming. So these notes will be on the blog, Amanda Grace, the number 4 him.blogspot.com. We will make sure to have them up for you within a day or two, so you can have them. Now, Build Back Better is the slogan, we'll call him, of Joe B. Okay. But this slogan goes back to 2015. Okay. Probably farther back than that. But it turns out that this Build Back Better refers to the official Sendai framework of disaster recovery that was adopted in the UN. Because you can find this, what was within the notes of this UN meeting. Okay, you're going to find this very interesting. So here are the excerpts from this UN World Conference of 2015. This is the driving force behind the outcome of the World Conference. It has resulted in a 15-year plan of action with 7 global targets and 4 priorities for action. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction is, they were planning from 2015 to 2030. The Sendai framework can have a revolutionary impact on sustainable development because of its far-reaching inclusive nature. It builds on the solid achievements of the last decade of implementing, and they call it the Hyogo Framework for Action. And what it means is building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters. Interesting, huh? And zooms in on the need to switch emphasis from disaster management to managing the risks. The outcome document also makes clear that far greater attention must be paid to social and health-related issues in the implementation. The states backing this agreement recognize that progress depends on a whole of society, herd immunity, whole of society approach, which must be inclusive of key stakeholder groups, including women, persons living with disability, youth and children, older persons, indigenous people, the private sector, and civil society in all its diversity. Make concrete progress on a universal vision and plan for sustainability. Okay, so let's go on here. I'm going to read to you a little bit more. Enhanced work to reduce exposure and vulnerability, thus preventing the creation of new disaster risks, and accountability for disaster risk creation are needed at all levels. More dedicated action needs to be focused on tackling underlying disaster risk drivers, such as the consequences of poverty and inequality, climate change, variability, unplanned and rapid urbanization, poor land management, and compounding factors such as demographics, weak institutional arrangements, non-risk informed policies, lack of regulation, and incentives for private disaster risk reduction investment. Okay, they go on to talk about in it. Now listen to this. Limited availability of technology, unsustainable uses of natural resources, declining ecosystems, pandemics, and epidemics. This is in the 2015 document of this meeting. Moreover, it is necessary to continue strengthening good governance and disaster risk reduction strategies at the national, regional, and global levels, and improving preparedness and national coordination for disaster response, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Build back better. Okay? That's basically what it means. And to use post-disaster recovery and reconstruction to build back better, supported by strengthened modalities of international cooperation. Okay? They go on to talk about government engaging with people from all different walks. They give a list here, okay, to implement these policies, plans, standards. Okay? They said there is a need for public and private sector and civil society organizations, as well as academia, scientific and research institutions, to work more closely together and to create opportunities for collaboration, and for businesses to integrate disaster. Why am I reading this to you? Because it's going to tie into everything. It's going to tie into 9/11, Build Back Better. It's going to tie into the Arch of Baal. It's going to tie into what they're doing now. And we're going to put the pieces together to see exactly how this happened, okay? Because this is important, because the Lord, because of what's about to happen, the Lord needs everybody to know this now, okay? So what we're going to do, because this is also has a built-in Read the Bible with Amanda Grace, we're going to go to Isaiah chapter 9, because all of this, so this meeting from the UN, the Build Back Better, 9/11, the Arch of Baal, and now all ties to Isaiah chapter 9. And we're going to go Isaiah chapter 9, verses 8 through 21. Thank you, Andre. And we're going to read. And this is what it says. The Lord sent a word against Jacob, and it has fallen on Israel. All the people will know, Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, who say in pride and arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. Therefore, the Lord shall set up the adversaries of Rezin against him and spur his enemies on, the Syrians before and the Philistines behind, and they shall devour Israel with an open mouth, for all his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. For the people do not turn to him who strikes them, nor do they seek the Lord of hosts. Therefore, the Lord will cut off head and tail from Israel. That goes for leadership. Palm branch and bulrush in one day. The elder and honorable, he is the head. The prophet who teaches lies, he is the tail. So basically what they're talking about here is those like Balaam's who are bought and paid for by a corrupt government, okay? To just like Ahab had the prophets of Baal that just told him what he wanted to hear, Ahab. That's what they're talking about, okay? Same thing. For the leader of this people causes them to err, and those who are led by them are destroyed. Therefore, the Lord will have no joy in their young men, nor have mercy on their fatherless and widows, for everyone is a hypocrite and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks folly. For all this, his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. For wickedness burns as the fire, it shall devour the briars and thorns, and kindle in the thickets of the forest. They shall mount up like rising smoke. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is burned up, and the people shall be as fuel for the fire. No man shall spare his brother, and he shall snatch on the right hand and be hungry. He shall devour on the left hand and not be satisfied. Every man shall, now this is interesting, every man shall eat the flesh of his own arm. I find that statement interesting, considering what we see going on right now. Manasseh shall devour Ephraim, and Ephraim, Manasseh, together they shall be against Judah. Okay, that's where I'm going to end right there, because the end of it is for all this, his anger is not turned away. And that's where we're going to end. Now, what is the Lord talking about in this? The bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild with hewn stone. The sycamores are cut down, but we will replace them with cedars. What was Israel saying to God, or the leadership of Israel at that time saying to God? We will build back better. So if you knock down, if you try to destroy God, what we're trying to do, we're just going to build it back better in your face, God, in pride and arrogance. We're going to build it back better. That's exactly what this is talking about in Isaiah. Exactly. The bricks have fallen, but we're just going to replace them with stronger stone. The sycamores have fallen. We're just going to replace them with stronger trees, which are cedars. So even though you knocked these down, God, or even though this happened or was allowed to happen, we're just going to replace it with something stronger and not submit to you. This was Israel digging in their heels at the Lord, refusing to submit to God and trusting in the plans of corrupt men. Okay, this is what this is about. Now, So Joe B lays out this Build Back Better, July 9th, 2020. He lays this out 2 months and 4 days prior to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Okay. So he lays it out 2 months and 4 days, which is 64 days, I believe, prior to 9/11, to the 20th anniversary. What does it mean truly when Israel said what they said and when Joe B lays this plan out? According to Isaiah chapter 9, what does this mean? It meant that in their pride, the leaders and people of the northern kingdom of Israel said, "Who cares if God judges us? Whatever is torn down, we will rebuild with something better. We will build back better. We have nothing to fear from what God can bring against us." Instead of humbling themselves before the face of God on account of the many calamities that had already descended on them, they still entertained a lighthearted optimism regarding the future. So this optimism manifested itself in the slogans that were current in their day and apparently on everybody else's lips. Now, what are some of the slogans of today, these lighthearted slogans? Build back better. Let's get VAXXED. We are all in this together. So these are some of the more lighthearted slogans, okay, of today that are comparable to things Israel might have been saying in their time, in their construct, okay? So this is a brief but deeply psychological picture that's presented here of an unfaithful generation that keeps dreaming of better times to come and looking to man, okay, instead of looking to God, looking to science instead of looking to God, looking to the government and media and corrupt people within it for their answers instead of looking to God, and lightheartedly ignore the severity of what's happening in their nation. Lightheartedly ignore that if they don't return unto God, they're going to be come at from many sides, because it talks about that in Isaiah, from one army coming from one side, one army coming from the other side, okay? So in a way, they were attempting to get ahead of the judgments of God or the consequences of their actions by attempting to come back with better and better man-made, fallible solutions that deeply troubled and corrupt men and women have created, okay? Same thing is happening now to a degree. Same thing. Now, how does all of this happening and the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and 9/11, how does this all tie together of what's happening now? Okay. I'm going to tell you something. There is a lot of truth that is poised to come out in 2022 about 9/11. There is a lot. So now we're going to go back to Isaiah chapter 9 again, starting at verse 8. The bricks have fallen. So what we're seeing happen now is the same thing that happened 20 years ago. The bricks have fallen. So after the attack of 9/11, New York Post writer Richard Pyle said, for 3 months, the Acres site had the look of post-World War II Berlin. Remember Berlin. Remember, this man said this. We're going to come back to this. Reduced to piles of bricks. The bricks have fallen. This is a direct quote from the New York Post. Another wrote, tons of twisted metal, bricks, and ash. Yet another wrote, glass and bricks. The bricks have fallen, but we will rebuild. Soon after the destruction of what happened came the call to rebuild. We'll build back better. And the Freedom Tower. A sign said, a new icon will rise above the skyline, the Freedom Tower. We will rebuild stronger and better. This is when the public began to be groomed for this. Was right there at 9/11. The leaders of New York City and New York State came together. They gathered around ground zero and they made a vow. And they said, we will build this great Freedom Tower. It will be bigger and better. We will build back better. We will show the world that we will stand taller than ever. Okay? President Trump even threw his hat into the ring on this with some comments as well. I'm telling you, watch that Freedom Tower. Keep your eyes on that Freedom Tower because something very major is set to occur with that tower. That is like a Babel of sorts built in a defiance instead of humbling the nation before mighty God. It was built in defiance of a very wicked internal plot that they put into motion that has to do with today. Now, this Arch of Baal is unveiled in London. Passover begins that year 3 days later. So 3 days prior to Passover, they do this. 3 not only biblically means truth, but interestingly enough, Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days. His ministry was 3 years long. Gimel is the 3rd letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And in Hebrew, the word Gimel, which means a benefactor. Okay, that's interesting. A benefactor. The letter, I'm trying to think how to say this to you guys. The letter after Gimel. So if Gimel is the 3rd letter of the Hebrew alphabet, it means benefactor. Okay. And the letter after Gimel in the Hebrew alphabet is Dalet, D-A-L-E-T, which is the 1st letter of the word dal, which means weak. A weak benefactor has appeared through the Arch of Baal. Okay? A weak benefactor makes its debut in London. Okay? Then you have the 3rd and 4th letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Gimel and Dalet. Weak benefactor. I don't find that to be completely coincidental. Okay? So in a way, the world or the people of the world were being called a weak benefactor. And if you take the number 14, because it's 14 years after 9/11, this arch appears. The number 14 in Hebrew is not only is related to the word strong hand, I believe. So it means a strong hand, but it also means trying to spiritual completion. So what they started with Baal, they are trying to spiritually complete to what they presume are weak benefactors, the people of earth. They're very deliberate in how they do this. The kingdom of darkness, the corrupt who serve them, are very deliberate. They're very aware of the Hebrew calendar. They're very aware of when they're going to position something to try to give them a spiritual advantage. So, a month later, after this arch is unveiled in London, in May 2016, sinkholes start opening up in London that are swallowing cars. If you remember, when the golden calf was debuted at Mount Sinai and the people began to rebel, Korah's rebellion, there was also a sinkhole opened up in the earth that swallowed them. Well, these sinkholes started opening up a month later in London and swallowing cars. That's not coincidental either. I just thought that was an interesting tidbit that all of you would like to know. A 50-foot replica of the arch forming the entrance to the Temple of Baal was installed in New York earlier this month, honoring the symbol of a pagan deity that the Islamic State destroyed in 2015. According to the New York Times, the 2,000-year-old Syrian town of Palmyra brought Muslims and Christians together for centuries. What the New York Times won't tell you is the Jewish history of the Temple of Baal and the abomination that it was for God's people to be remotely connected to it. This is unveiled in New York City, where 9/11 happened 14 years prior, about 14 and a half years prior. So 14 and a half years later, in New York City, they've made it 50 feet tall. 50 in Hebrew has to do with the Jubilee. It has to do with something else too, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the 50th year of the land, which is also a Shabbat of the land, is called Yovel in Hebrew, which is the origin of the Latin term Jubilee, also meaning 50th. It is the year at the end of 7 cycles of Shemitah years, which are every 7th year. They're sabbatical years. And according to biblical regulations, had a special impact on the ownership, and management of land in the land of Israel. So by unveiling that arch in New York City, where 9/11 happened, where this plot all began, they are trying to take ownership of the land. They are utilizing a principality to try to take ownership of the United States of America. Okay? The 50th year is called Yovel, I believe, which translates to the ram's horn or shofar. Okay? And it says, on the Day of Atonement, you shall sound the trumpet throughout all of your land. It's also on Rosh Hashanah. You shall sound the shofar. Interestingly enough, the year Jubilee, or the word Jubilee, which comes from the Latin word jubileus, which is very similar to another Latin word, jubilare, Jubilare, which means to shout with joy. And that is the reason for using this word in a manner of a celebration or party. However, in biblical Hebrew, this term Jubilee is neutral and has no indication of a happy event or a celebration, okay? Interestingly enough, too, in the book of Esther, Haman built a gallows 50 cubits high to have Mordecai hanged on. Haman built a gallows 50 cubits high, 50, in which he was going to hang Mordecai on. That then Purim happened. There was a divine reversal, and Haman was hung on his own 50-foot gallows. There was a reason they were making it 50 feet tall. And it has to do with all of this. Now, how this all ties to the arch in today. Okay. Well, let's do a little background on who Baal, okay, was, biblically speaking. He was a Canaanite god in the Old Testament. Principalities are still alive and well today in the spirit realm. The Israelites grieved God by turning from him and worshiping Baal, creating idols, participating in sacrificing of people, of sexual immorality, the Israelites' unfaithfulness to God, even sacrificing their children. Even after he brought them out of Egypt, they did this. It incensed the Lord on so many occasions, and he gave them over to their enemies. It was their unfaithfulness and Baal worship that ultimately led to their captivity and displacement as a nation. Okay? So there's many times in the word of God where Israel kept going back to Baal worship, even after they saw all the mighty things God had delivered them out of, all the things God had done for them, all the things by God's power and outstretched arm he did to free them, to set them free, to deliver them from their enemies, to bring them out of Egypt. They would go back to this. And they were trying to return the nation back to Baal to destroy it. They were putting that arch in the financial hub of the United States of America, which is New York City, where 9/11 had happened 20 years, which is unveiled. So it's unveiled 14 days prior to Rosh Hashanah. This is what happened. Okay, let me tell you what happened here. So in September, the arch is brought to the U.S. It is unveiled 14 days prior to Rosh Hashanah. in the US, in New York City. So once again, we're dealing with spiritual measures, spiritual completion, trying to carry out something spiritually complete on their end, okay? Mocking what real spiritual completion and perfection is in Almighty God. Interestingly enough, to translate what they did, because you've got the number 14 here at play, you've got them doing this right before Rosh Hashanah, you've got Yom Kippur, that was the beginning of October that year. To translate what they did in the nation 14 days prior to Rosh Hashanah, this is what it means. Baal and his worshipers were coming out with a strong hand, 14 associated with strong hand in Hebrew, attempting to pour out his spirit in the nation, spiritual completion. So that's what it means when they were unveiling it at the time that they did. Baal and his worshipers were coming out with a strong hand, attempting to pour out his spirit in this nation. Interestingly enough, the number 14, when Purim occurs, where Haman's hung on the 50-foot cubit gallows that he made for Mordecai, is the 14th of the month of Adar. So it's no accident that that 14 and a half years after 9/11, the arch is first unveiled. And then it's no accident it's unveiled 14 days, I believe, prior to Rosh Hashanah in New York City. September 19th was the day of the unveiling of this arch. Or was it 14 days prior to Yom Kippur? It was one or the other. It was either 14 days out from Rosh Hashanah or 14 days prior to Yom Kippur that this is unveiled. All I have to do here, we'll look this up real fast. We'll do this real time, and we'll see here when Rosh Hashanah 2016. Okay. So, Rosh Hashanah started late the year of 2016. It started October 2nd. So it was 14 days before Rosh Hashanah that this is unveiled, okay, in New York City. We just wanted to double check that for all of you. So September 19th is the day of the unveiling, which is 14 days prior to the start of Rosh Hashanah in the year 20. First thought. So September 19th to November 8th. We're going to do this live, and we're going to figure this out together. We're going to figure this out together. How many days between September 19th and November 8th, 2016? If someone wants to calculate that, we need how many days are between September 19th and November 8th of 2016. How many days? Is it 50? Because if it's 50, we've ended up better than we first thought with 45. Okay, so how many days between? It's 50 days. Okay, we're ending up even better than 45. UN 2015 Disaster Relief Conference. Everything they were planning then, in a way, is stalled. The Arch of Baal makes a reappearance in D.C. September 26th, 2018. 8 days prior to Yom Kippur in 2018, 2 years into the presidency, the arch makes a reappearance, and it makes it in Washington, D.C., of all places. It has hit all these financial hubs now, and all these hubs of leadership. London is their financial hub in England. Then it hit the financial hub in the United States of America, New York. And now 2 years into the presidency, it has now been unveiled. This September 6, 2018 is when it's erected 8 days prior to Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement on the Jewish calendar. Okay?